Hi, I'm Darla Cameron, the interim chief product officer at the Texas Tribune. You're joining us today for Texas and the AI Revolution. We're going to talk about business and government. In this Texas Tribune conversation, you'll learn more about product from leaders about how they're approaching artificial intelligence, how this technology is already having an impact, and what's on the horizon. I'm going to first introduce our panelists who are joining me today. Sherri Greenberg is a professor of practice and fellow of the Max Sherman Chair in State and Local Government at the LBJ School for Public Affairs, and she is a professor of practice at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. She's also the LBJ School's Assistant Dean for State and Local Government Engagement. She is a primary researcher and chairperson of Good Systems, a University of Texas program regarding ethical AI. Angela Wilkins is Chief Data Officer at Starling Medical. Previously, she served as an executive director of Rice University's Ken Kennedy Institute, an interdisciplinary group that works collaboratively on groundbreaking research in artificial intelligence, data, and computing. She's also one of the 4 members appointed to the Texas Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council by Governor Greg Abbott. This council is studying how state agencies use AI. Amina Al Sherif is a technical engineering lead in machine learning and generative AI at Google. She focuses on areas such as state and local government, federal, and defense, and has a background in AI ethics. Amina has experience working in early-stage machine learning and AI startups in the defense and intelligence space, and established a nonprofit organization, the Data Ethics Consortium for Security, focusing on the crossroads between security and AI in the public sector. Thank you so much to these great panelists for joining us today. The first question I have for you to get the conversation started is, what is the biggest misconception about AI in this moment that you want non-technical people to understand?
Sure. I think it's hard to pick the biggest. There are a lot of misconceptions. So I would say one is that AI is not just one thing. It's not just generative AI. It's many, many attributes of AI. And the other is that we do not yet have what we call AGI, artificial general intelligence. There are no sentient AI beings at this point.
I think I would add that basically AI is not as new as we think it is. The AI has really been recently kind of redefined to cover lots of things that some of us have been doing for many, many decades. And it's interesting because we have a lot of language changing in real time.
I love both of the points that Angela and Sherri made. One, that AI is actually a blanket umbrella term for a lot of different fields that span anywhere from knowledge management systems to machine learning. So AI is very diverse in many different things. I also appreciate the comment on AGI, and to kind of springboard off of that, to go to Angela's point of none of this is new. As someone who's worked in the data science field for 8 years now, and who is a computational linguist, so I have been working with language for a while. These capabilities that we have on the generative side have been around since at least 2017, if not earlier, in some way, shape, or form. And then the last thing, I guess, that I would just accent in terms of where we are with AI today, right now, AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. It is simply compressed mathematics that is using math to create patterns of understanding of the world around us, right? So if you ascribe to the theory that math can, in fact, be a human or do human-like things, then maybe we're closer to AGI than you think. But there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in that regard in terms of public opinion and professional opinion on whether that's in fact true or not. So just keep in mind that right now AI is basically really sophisticated math doing really fast pattern making for us, and really not much more than just that.
And I do want to highlight what both of my colleagues have said. It's really the combination of math and linguistics that is so important, I think.
Yeah, and I think the challenge, like the great thing Okay, so large language models have basically just opened the door, really opened the door so that we all can connect with the math in a new way. The math has been there for a while.
Right.
It's really these new language models that are just allowing us to communicate better with it.
And yes, I think that's exactly the point, combining the math with the large language models. The math and the linguistics combined is what's really, for the general public, all of a sudden brought AI to the forefront, even though, as we know, it's been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
I kind of like that it's math masquerading as other things, because people don't like math, right? So that's kind of, that awareness. I think those are really, really great things to great things to highlight in terms of how these things actually behind the scenes.
I think people are starting to like math more lately.
I think it depends. Some people like math, some don't. Some people like language, some don't. That's the professor in me.
That makes sense. So I want to talk a little bit about Texas and how this state has really successfully positioned itself to lure big tech companies, from the manufacturing wing of tech to big headquarters in some cases. So there are a few factors that, within the state that I think could put the brakes on this kind of growth. And the first one is energy and the energy grid. How might we responsibly grow this energy and water hungry sector, especially when part of the state is in a prolonged drought? How should we be thinking about that kind of growth?
So I guess I can kick this off a little bit in terms of growth. Being at a hyperscaler like Google, so in 2023 alone, we saw a 23% increase in emissions from our data centers. And that has entirely just been attributed to training AI systems, not running them, just training them. Just creating these large language models has led to that much of an increase. Every single query that we make to a system like ChatGPT, I'm not saying this is just exclusive to ChatGPT, is equivalent to 1 water bottle per query, right? So if you think about the amount of usage that this type of AI is starting to experience, we're going to be hitting some very untenable, frankly, resource limitations very soon, right? So Texas as a state, but also the hyperscalers and the companies and the government entities that are involved in this entire kind of logistics chain and process of making AI happen, need to make sure that as these systems are being stood up and as these capabilities are being opened up, that hyperscalers like Google and others are being held accountable insofar as environmental impact goes. Now, with that being said, Google made a massive shift in, for example, I believe it was 2018 when we released our TPU v4 chip, and we revamped every single data center that we had in the globe, which is a lot of data centers, with brand new chips to be able to perform AI in all of our consumer products, simply because the chips reduced the amount of energy needed to cool the data centers themselves by almost 80%. And so the commitment has to be hard and strong, or else the business is no longer tenable, which is why I think a lot of vendors are and hyperscalers are really having a reckoning moment right now in general in terms of climate impact with this large scale AI capability. So something that Texas needs to think about, right? All of us live in Texas. I have persistent well water issues. I'm not especially excited about every single query taking a bottle of water away from maybe my resources. But we also have a reckoning insofar as the Third Coast has now become almost the second capital for tech. So with that being said, what will we do moving forward to make it sustainable?
And I cannot ignore the elephant in the room, the electric grid in Texas. As we know, we have our own grid. And we have seen with weather events, and I know Angela has experienced a couple recently in Houston, the grid is all important. And you can right now get online and you will see dozens of articles today about AI and the amount of electricity it is drawing from the electric grid in the state of Texas. Of course, issues with the grid is that's a general issue here in the state of Texas. And now we have to layer on top of it AI and the amount of electricity that AI is drawing from the grid. So I think this is a very big issue.
I think there's one aspect around the actual making of algorithms, the code, that like we need to spend more time making efficient, optimized. It seems like a lot of times we focus on making fancy algorithms, but we forget that every time we make something fancier, we actually make it more computationally intensive, and that we need to basically, this needs to be part of the process. Like, and I know that there's many professors at both UT and Rice University and many places in Texas that this is what they do. This is all what they do all day long, is try to improve, the optimization. And it's just something we need to focus more on, because it would create a situation where there was less need for something that we're going to continually increase our need for.
Absolutely. I know that Google has a public goal of running carbon neutral data centers by 2030, I believe. How does AI impact that goal, if you can say?
I can't authoritatively speak on behalf of Google in terms of how that impact has been made. The goals have stayed the same, right? So by 2035, carbon neutral on all the data centers that we own in the world. Given that we carry anywhere from 20 to 40% of the global internet traffic a day, that's a lot of data centers. And the goal is not to pay remittances or, essentially use money to offset emissions. The goal is to actually use, kind of going back to the point Angela just mentioned, not just software engineering to optimize what happens in a data center, but also hardware engineering and firmware, right? So the thing that sits in between the hardware, the chips that are actually running computation, and the software, there's a layer that can also be optimized further for that kind of energy saving effects. What Google has been able to do almost every time a new wave of AI something hits, whether it's, as Angela mentioned, a new, more fancy, more complicated algorithm, or just like a new type or a new way of computing, whether it's a new chip or not, is there is almost always a full wash of well, how does this affect our climate goals insofar as reaching that carbon neutrality by 2035? What you're seeing now, insofar as LLM impact, just large language models and generative AI in general, the impact on the energy grid, on Google's energy grid, insofar as like our resources and backbone and logistics and what we own, has been so great that, as Angela mentioned as well, we have our own team at Google that is working on both sides of the fence, if you will, when it comes to generative AI. How do we make bigger models better and maybe get closer to AGI? But then also, how do we make models significantly smaller so that we don't run into diminishing returns on compute?
And I do think I do think it's really important to look at how we can, and rather than continue to increase the impact on the Texas grid, are there things we can do to decrease the impact on the Texas grid? What do you think, Amina?
Well, that's hard for me to say because Google is really heavily investing in Texas. Mm-hmm. Just in the past few months, or actually the past 5 years alone, I think we have 3 new data centers being stood up in the Dallas DFW area, right? So like 3 data centers, those are large, right? They're like very large data centers. And so it's hard to say because it feels like everyone in the tech world is looking at Texas right now. And so because everyone in the world is looking at Texas, I think Texas now needs to turn around and dictate to the rest of the world, this is how we do tech on our terms, right?
Mhm.
And this is how
Mhm.
it's going to be done in that way. And when Darla and I had spoken before, I had actually, Sherri, put you on the spot in terms of, I think the educational institutions working with government can do a really good job on helping create what that policy and what that opinion and what those like hard stops are and where areas that you do want to push. I think combining those two organizations together to create that synergy will help hyperscalers like Google understand and know what is your climate posture as all of the large tech companies descend upon Austin, Texas, right?
Exactly, not just Austin, but the state in general. And the question before us is not how do, we're not trying to say don't come to Texas. The question is, how do we combine these goals, right? How do we have the prosperity that we're looking towards while having policies in place that, as you said, Amina, help the tech companies understand and mitigate for. And I do think that education plays a huge role in this. I think that it's incumbent upon us, really starting in kindergarten, all the way through, college and even in our community to educate people about AI, how you use AI, the role of AI, and the skills, frankly, that they need for the future, including how do we combine the growth in AI in our state with some of the challenges that we know we face, along with some of the workforce skills that we know people will need.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I think it's just like education, but also education and research, because we're also training those researchers.
Mhm.
One of the things I've seen Texas do that's really, really good is to aligning the academics, the researchers with the goals of the state is secret, where, they're putting out government funding for basically doing research that would help Texas deal with cancer. And the same thing, it basically creates situations where companies will come to Texas and be in Texas to get this research funding. I could imagine it would make sense for Texas to basically align money towards research and education that would basically help with these goals around the grid, because as somebody who's lost their electricity twice in 2 months, it's not going away.
Yes, and with Good Systems, which is ethical AI at University of Texas at Austin, that is exactly what we're doing. We combine education for undergraduate and graduate students with research and policy work across 18 or more different colleges and departments within the University of Texas at Austin. And I think that all of us, in whether we're in the academic sector, the government, the private sector, need to be cognizant of the challenges and of the skills and training that we need.
Could you comment about, like, because I mean, putting together something like that's not easy.
No,
And
it's not. And certainly research is a big part of what we're doing at Good Systems and at other universities and other entities around the state. So I think that research is a key component, and we need to continue that, but it has to be combined with the educational aspects and with looking at policies. And I really feel very strongly that all of this must be interdisciplinary, not just multi, but actually interdisciplinary. Because as you've seen from the discussion, whether we're talking about combining math and language or the different policy issues that we're talking about, this is a very interdisciplinary field and will continue to be so.
Absolutely. I love how y'all touched on my second question, which was the second kind of mitigating factor for the growth of tech in Texas, which is the workforce. So how we kind of think about those things in an interdisciplinary way is really important. I want to ask a kind of ethical question. I imagine there's folks watching this who are getting constant AI pitches in their inbox, like from companies saying, "Oh, AI can help you solve all your problems." How should we evaluate those pitches, and how should people be thinking about, like, okay, what can this actually do for me versus like the limitations on the technology?
I call this the shiny new toy syndrome. It's not just with AI. We've been seeing for many years with all kinds of technologies, right? There's the pitch, whether you're in the public sector, the private academia, we all get these pitches, right? By text, by email, by land, by air, by sea. And so the first question is, what's the use case, right? Great,
Yeah.
it's a shiny new toy. Do I need it? Is it going to help me? So I start with what's the business case? What's the use case? Is there a need for this?
Yeah. One of the things I've seen here is some of the hospitals, in particular Methodist, has a really good process for deciding whether or not to bring a company in. And, you know, it's a series of, questions they ask and things they check, but at the end of the day, what they're looking for is something called traction. And it's like, will somebody use it? Because there's so many, like you said, you're getting bombarded by thousands of people nowadays, and if nobody will use it, there's really no reason to even try.
Right.
I think
Now,
think-
if you want to talk, yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, and then if you want to talk about all the bias and ethical problems with each of them, that could go on for days.
Oh, absolutely. For weeks even.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to, I used to, in a prior life, I used to purchase technology for the military. I was in the service for 12 years, and there were a few things that I learned in terms of how to spot and assess technology that is going to be useful for either government, education, or business use case. And I think it comes down to a couple of very few important things. One, I think I keep going back to research in our education institutions. The mind share of humans who understand the hype cycle that we're currently in, and the number of humans that understand the true nature of the hype cycle that we're currently in with generative AI, probably number in the low hundreds. And all of those humans usually sit at either hyperscalers like Google, so they're at the vendor, or they are sitting at education institutions performing research. I think it would be lovely, and I've seen this happen a couple of different times in other states, to see the state and local government lean on education institutions to help them with kind of that weeding out of what vendors and technologies do we want now that make sense for us, and which ones are frankly not mature enough for, let's say, government posture and use and availability to residents to consume in the form of some kind of product or service or whatever it might be. Or maybe, here are some technologies that are suitable for businesses, small businesses, startups that are agile, maybe can take on a little more risk, and help create that kind of spectrum of ever evolving technologies that are entering the space. So technologists who,
Yes.
work in the space day to day, we know what's important. We know what it is that are basic ingredients that you need to get that stickiness that Sherri mentioned, of going out and actually solving a problem and exacting some kind of result, right? So,
Right.
so that's the process that I think will help mitigate some of that bias and or maybe leanings towards one technology or another, or even just the lack of education or knowing, right? Looking for a problem to suit the technology instead of the technology to suit the problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that needs-
Technology is not always the answer, and you do need to look at what is the outcome, right? From a researcher standpoint, it's what are the outcome measures? And I agree that, educational institutions are working with state and local government and need to continue to do that, not just to educate their students, because I think every student coming in should have a general course in AI.
But
But
I think,
beyond
right,
that, mhm.
yeah, I would just say that I love the idea because I think one of the things is we need to create more incentives for this, like that it essentially, like we need to have this feedback loop. It's already happening. Professors and students want to do work that matters, but we need to help create that bridge.
That's an excellent point. They do want to do work that matters. And I teach a lot of practical real world courses where it's research, but it's applied research. And we need to have, yes, that constant feedback loop. We need to have a way that this is a continuous process with state and local government and our researchers and academic and other research entities. Beyond that, something that I have seen for years is a lack of expertise, whether it's public sector, private academia, in those who are actually doing purchasing and contracting. Okay.
Yeah.
As I say, you don't just, pluck a social worker out of the field and now say, oh, you're going to sit across the table with the CEO, whatever, from this tech company, and everything's going to work out well. Those are specific fields, purchasing and contracting, where you need education, right? And you need the people at the table assessing the technology, looking at the use cases, the outcome measures, who are involved in this. Now, with technology, and now with AI, I call it the brave new world of, purchasing, procurement, and contracting.
Yeah.
So what within that, like, quick follow-up on that point, especially, what should governments and the healthcare industry especially be kind of thinking about when they're considering using AI that outsources the black box of decision making? Because it's hard to know. This is where we get into the ethical gray area with how these models can be biased when it's making a choice based on things it's learned in the past and therefore perpetuating biases. So what's like the one thing that you need that people making those kinds of decisions need to have in their mind?
Process. There needs to be process. I mean, yes, they need a lot of knowledge, but they need something that's repeatable, that, they bring something in, it doesn't work. Why didn't it work? What do we do next time? How can we adjust? It's one of the things that worries me. It worries me more that people won't use anything than make the bad choices. Like I've seen basically organizations just refuse to try anything. And I think in some level that's worse.
And they need to have processes and criteria, right? They need to go in with their eyes wide open, with an understanding of their needs, and then the criteria that they're going to use in selection. And we went through this in the early days with, governments having an online presence, right, with the websites. Okay, was this going to be proprietary, where you couldn't make changes to the website? Or was it going to be something where, it was an open and you could continue to make changes? That's just an example. We're having similar discussions with AI, right? Is it proprietary or not? And what suits your needs?
Yeah. Learning how to test, and it's being able to try something. Did I get what I need? It didn't hit that criteria. Got to do something else.
I think insofar as not to, no pun intended, but I do tend to be very biased when I talk about bias in models and machine learning and AI, because there is, in my opinion, no such thing as an unbiased model. And the reason being is because models are consuming data produced by humans, and humans are inherently biased. And Darla, you asked about the healthcare, community. How many times have we gone to first, second, third opinions and gotten vastly different feedback from different doctors? And the reality is, I think what our moment of reckoning is right now, insofar as stereotyping, bias, any kind of imbalance in models goes, is every organization this is an opportunity for you to have a reckoning with your organization in terms of figuring out, like, who are we and what do we consider to be ethical. And then once you have that defined for your organization and your mission, then you have the blueprint and the template to go out to look for technology that matches how you define ethics to be implemented in your organization. Because ethical AI in the military and intelligence community is not going to look the same as ethical AI would look in the banking industry, right? It's just it's two different languages entirely in terms of what people are trying to accomplish.
That's so true. There's
Yeah.
bias everywhere.
Yeah,
And the issue is, if you're looking at a city, you have issues that you really need to consider regarding bias and the algorithms, the human input. Policing would be one. Fire, there are so many. In healthcare, you have bias in donor selections, right? There is bias there. In the military, when you look at ethics, how do we feel about robots roaming the field, for instance? What does that mean? And so it is specific to the organization, and what you need to consider in the way of bias in the arena in which you're operating. As I said, healthcare is very specific. Cities have specific consideration. The military has specific considerations. Yes.
And I might add about the healthcare. I mean, it is regulated. Like, we have lots of privacy laws. We have the FDA. There's all CDC. Like, it's and it's still biased. And I can't agree more that I think it comes back to culture, mission, vision, aligning that with the goals basically makes a lot of this easier, because biases are everywhere, as Amina said. And I don't think I don't think there's like ever going to be this magic button fix where everything's sorted out.
So, Angela, I want to ask you about the Texas Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council that you're serving on. You're kind of getting this high-level view of how every state agency is using, or a lot of them are using AI already, or how they aren't. Was there anything about their usage of AI that surprised you or was unexpected?
I would say that one thing that might have surprised me is everybody was different. I mean, that there was some organizations that were very, very agile, making very good progress, had lots of projects going on, had relationships. And then you had, organizations that were just not doing anything, and that they had actually decided that that was going to be, the way they were going to move forward from right now. And so, and I do think that's one of the things that this commission is about, is basically trying to align all these organizations. But it was a very, there was 100 different model systems, and they were all doing things slightly differently.
Is there like a sense among that group, if part of the goal is bringing state workers along for the ride with AI, like how you're, are you wanting to help them adapt to these systems, or are we thinking like, hey, we're going to need a totally new state workforce? What's the sense there?
I think a lot of it, and I think that's something that because the commission is really basically collecting information, and we'll basically put together this report where we, this is what we saw, this is what we suggest. And I think we're going to see a lot of evolving the workforce. Because I think one thing that stood out to me, most of the organizations had some sort of chief AI person now. So within a lot of them, they had somebody who was in charge of thinking about this. I did think it was interesting. A lot of these people, it's not, they weren't practitioners. Basically, they had been kind of tasked with something. There's definitely, they're thinking a lot about training. They are definitely thinking a lot about training already. But I think one of the things that we'll see also is just a lot of process and protocols around how we work with other vendors, companies, because at the end of the day, they're not, the government is not going to become a tech company. We have to learn how to work with tech companies.
Absolutely. I want to, so this council is hearing a lot from state government about their thoughts about it. I want us to kind of think about what are the things that we could learn from other Texans, right? Like younger people especially might have very different feelings about that privacy versus convenience trade-off. So how do we kind of open ourselves up to hearing what people are thinking about the usage? At the Texas Tribune, we put a survey about how we're using AI for our journalism on our site, and we want to hear from readers before we adopt these tools in different ways. We know that we need to listen. So how would the three of you think about opening yourselves up and, you know, having those sorts of conversations where we can hear from different people with different perspectives on this technology?
I think that's extremely important question. And of course, we know there are some research techniques. You can do surveys. You can have focus groups where you get people in a room. And I led a focus group on a different topic this morning. So those are research techniques. Beyond that, you do have to actually ask people what they want. And you cannot just ignore the technology and the repercussions and think that you know everything. In academia, you know, some faculty may have originally said, oh, we're just not going to allow that. Really? You're not going to allow it? This is a new technique. It could be good for research. So let's get input. Let's get input from students. Let's get input from faculty and researchers. And then let's examine how we can move forward with the technology in the best way. And it may be different when you're a researcher versus when you're in the classroom versus ways in which students will use it. But you get input and then you develop guidelines.
I've had some really interesting conversations around this. As someone who barely made it as a millennial, I don't understand Gen Z. I don't claim to understand Gen Z or Gen Alpha, but I have a 3-year-old daughter. And it is very realistic that in a few years from now, she might have AI friends or an AI boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever the case might be, right? So like the reality of young people that are the future of our workforce right now is going to look so vastly different than what we see today. And I think what we need to do is make sure that we are prepared for Gen Z and Gen Alpha because they are coming into the workforce. They're coming into the educational and academia workforce as well. And if they are using these types of tools constantly to live their everyday lives, there is a conceivable world in which, you know, teenagers, 5 years from now aren't able to know how to cook a meal unless they have ChatGPT available to tell them what to do with the things in their fridge, right? And so to deny them, to deny the community tools that they're already consuming seems to make not a whole lot of sense. There is a state that I did work with that did specific community outreach events where it was like a series of events that came very shortly after ChatGPT was released in 2022 that it was community gatherings to gather opinions that was qualitative and quantitative, and it continued on a monthly basis, right? And it has continued so far insofar as having the state agency that was hosting these kinds of outreach meetings trying to figure out how exactly their end users were using this technology and also their attitudes. And I know, Darla, we had talked about the privacy trade-off. It's the same trade-off that you see with security and convenience, right? Privacy, cool things. What's really interesting to note, and there was a study done about this regarding Waymo and autonomous cars, upcoming generations are actually less concerned about privacy insofar as if data is already needed to be collected in order for them to use something useful to them, and that data is also then used to make their experience more enhanced, whatever that might be, whether it's more convenient ads or more convenient recommendations, they tend to be okay with that. But it's when extra data that does not need to be collected for the system to work, that's when people seem to start having problems with privacy insofar as like, why are you collecting all this extra data about me when you don't need it in order for the tool to actually give me the functionality and delight that I anticipate? So,
I agree. Like, why do you have the camera on me? Do you need that? Do you need that video? Yes. There may be a place for it, it may not. You know, we used to talk about digital natives. Now I think you're talking about your daughter as an AI native. And this community outreach, I do think, is important. In Austin, we're discussing that too, how to do community outreach. And it really ties in with what I was saying on education. It doesn't end when your quote, whatever level formal education ends. Residents in our communities need to be educated, and we need to get feedback from them. It's very important to have that type of feedback. And I will also add that when you look at surveys, as Amina was talking about, of younger generations now, quality of life also is a big issue, and that trade-off between how much you're working versus your quality of life. And where does AI fit into that? Is this, do they see it as improving their quality of life and providing perhaps more leisure time? I don't know, but I think that these are questions we should ask.
One of the things I've seen happen with young people too, I'm going to actually mention a group called Encode Justice, because I have a meeting with them in a group in a few weeks, and it's a student-driven group of basically 1,000 high school and college students across the country that basically are collecting use cases and information that matters to them. And they reached out to me and going like, we want you to know about this. And, you know, it was very, very interesting because like I would have never done this in high school. And so when I see 1,000 students get together, put together a web page, start having meetings to talk about AI and what it means to them and what they want to see happen with it, I don't think we're going to be able to stop them from, they're going to make a difference.
That's really great. So at this pre-recorded session, we unfortunately can't take audience questions because we're getting things set ahead of time. But as our final thing, I want to ask each of you, what do you wish I had asked? What are the questions you have maybe for each other, or just, you know, things that we need to have in mind as we kind of encounter this big moment of technological change?
I mean, I feel like you asked a lot of really good questions. Maybe the only question that I can think of is, you know, if you had a crystal ball and you were looking into the future, what does work and life look like, you know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I always love those kinds of questions, because then you start getting the extrapolations of people looking at what it is that's happening to us now at the pace that we've been going since ChatGPT came out. And going, honestly, I have no idea. The last 2 years from a technology perspective as an AI person has kind of turned everything on its head very fast. But we saw this before in the 80s and the 60s when AI was popular back then, and then had winters that followed them shortly after. So I think that would be the question I would want to be asked. And I think as a technologist, one of the biggest fears right now is if we don't figure out how to make this technology useful, responsible, and ultimately a right fit, we might be headed for another AI winter. That is possible, right? Most people don't think that's the case. They think AI is here to stay. But I think as a technologist, that's something that I'm kind of really keeping an eye on in the future. And the thing that I would leave behind for folks that are listening in is stay open to new ideas with technology, because things change so fast. And if you get too married or tied to a specific type of technology or a specific vendor or a specific company or a specific way of doing things, you might find yourself in a very awkward situation, even just 3 years from now at the pace things are moving. So that would be my question.
Thanks. What do y'all think about her question?
Yeah.
I certainly, she really read my mind, because I have been focusing, one of the areas with AI that I've been focusing on the past few years is future of work. You could probably tell, future of work and labor and what it means to the economy, the workforce, what jobs will we have? What jobs perhaps will we not have? Is it possible that AI can be a tool to make our lives and our work more efficient? You talk about healthcare. There are some backbreaking jobs that maybe this can assist with, or not having to, code or do Excel spreadsheets or summarize meetings. You have an assistant, right? On the other hand, there are jobs, there are people, again, getting to Houston in the recent weather event, working on the electric lines above ground. What can we do? Well, is there a place for AI, and I do think there is, to enhance their lives, to make their work safer, more efficient, more effective, not replacing them, right? But making, as I said, their work and their work life better, whether they're in manufacturing, whether they're welders, whether they're on electric lines. So what is the role for AI in that respect?
No, both you guys make so much sense. I think for me, like one of the suggestions I've just been making to people is you need to learn because everything is going to be evolving so fast that I think about like 8 years ago when this data science thing became a thing. And, it's like, I think we saw some backlash from it, and I could see how another AI winter could happen. And I think if there is another AI winter, it's not the technology, it's us. We're the problem.
Yeah.
And, so we need to learn as much as we can because this technology, if we're open, flexible, as you guys were saying, it's like it will make a big difference in our lives. And I'm just so optimistic. I gotta be honest. Like, it's just, I see so much potential for making lives better. But we have to use it. And to use it, we have to be part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
And as a skill, I will say that when I'm thinking about education, learning and lifelong learning is the key right now. Everything, as we've talked about, is changing so fast. It's the ability to be curious, to want to learn, to know how to learn, and to be a critical thinker.
All right. On that note, we're going to end things. Sherri, Angela, Amina, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. We really appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks.
you.